Hello, and welcome to the second part of the Planning and Prepping module for the Community Garden webinar series. My name is Ken Johnson, and I'm a horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension. The previous section of this module discussed purchasing of plant material, picking a garden site, when to plant, and how to lay out a garden. In this section, we'll discuss a few different gardening and planting techniques that can be utilized to save space in community gardens. We'll also discuss prepping and fertilizing soils to prepare for the gardening season, as well as the proper use of manures and composts in gardens. The first space-saving technique we're going to talk about is square foot gardening. And square foot gardening is a gardening technique that's going to aim to use garden space rather efficiently. It's traditionally going to be used in a raised bed setting, however it can be used in any type of garden plot. So instead of growing crops in our traditional row system, this technique is going to divide a garden into 1 foot square sections. The garden is then going to be laid out by determining what types of plants are going to be grown in these individual square sections. And the size of the mature plant is going to determine the number of plants that can be placed in each of these sections. Typically, garden beds are going to be 4 foot by 4 foot when using this technique. However, you can use this in larger sized garden beds. Beds wider than 4 feet typically aren't going to be recommended because it's going to be difficult to reach the middle of those beds if it's any wider than 4 feet. People can usually reach about 2 feet. It's also important that all of the sides of the plot can be accessed when using this technique so you can reach all of your plants and work with them easily. Here we have an example garden plot that's been laid out using the square foot gardening technique. At the top we have sweet corn. And with sweet corn, we're going to have 4 plants per square foot section. In the second row, we have tomatoes, and these are larger plants, so we're only going to place 1 plant per square foot section. In the third row, we have peppers on the left and in the middle, and again, these are larger plants, so we're only going to put 1 plant per square foot. Next to the peppers on the right in the third row, we're going to have carrots, and carrots don't need a lot of space to grow, so we can fit 16 plants in each square foot section. On the bottom on the left, we have lettuce. Again, these are smaller type plants, so we can fit 4 plants per square foot. In the middle, we have broccoli. Again, the larger plants, only 1 plant per square foot. And on the right, we have pansies. Again, these are more of a moderate sized plant, so we can fit 4 pansies per square foot section. When laying out a garden plot, it's important to put taller crops on the northern end of the garden, which is why we've placed our sweet corn and tomatoes towards the north. And this is going to prevent those taller crops from shading out our shorter plants. So this technique is going to be a good technique to use when space is limited. And by making efficient use of our space, we can grow large amounts of food or flowers in a relatively small area. Another space-saving technique that's commonly used in community gardens is vertical gardening. Some popular garden crops such as cucumbers, squash, pumpkins are going to need considerable amount of room to grow. And depending on the area available to growers, it may not be practical to grow them in the ground like we traditionally do. However, we can use support structures if those are allowed in a community garden, and it can be possible to grow these plants vertically, saving us a considerable amount of space. In addition to saving space growing plants vertically, this can help increase airflow through the plants, which in turn can help reduce plant disease problems we have. Support structures are also commonly used in growing plants such as beans, peas, tomatoes, and some flowers. And for a more detailed look on some of the different ways plants can be grown vertically on supports, listen to Rhonda Free's section of the Garden Care module of this Community Garden webinar series. The last space-saving technique we'll talk about is straw bale gardening. And straw bale gardening has become a popular gardening technique in recent years, especially for people and gardeners with limited mobility. People have poor soil conditions that they have to work with, as well as limited gardening space. So instead of planting crops into the ground or into raised beds, those plants are going to be planted into straw bales. And it's important to make sure that you're using straw bales and not hay bales. If hay bales are used, there's a good chance you're going to encounter a lot of weed problems. And before plants can be planted into these straw bales, the bales need to be conditioned. During this conditioning process, bales will heat up and begin to decompose, and after this decomposition has begun, the bales can be planted into. So conditioning the bales is going to require keeping them wet as well as providing a nitrogen source, and that's going to help speed up that decomposition process. The nitrogen source can either be an organic or a synthetic fertilizer, and these fertilizers are going to be added over a 10-day period. After that 10th day, the temperature of that bale should be monitored. As the bales decompose, they're going to start to heat up, and they'll become too hot to plant in. If you plant too soon, you're going to damage your plants and potentially kill them. Once the temperatures begin to cool off, it'll then be safe to plant into the bales. For a more in-depth look at straw bale gardening, how to condition your bales, how long it takes, how to plant into them, check out Kelly Alsop's 4 Seasons gardening presentation, and that can be found at go.illinois.edu/4seasonsrecordings. Next, we'll talk about some of the different planting techniques we're going to see in a community garden. There's going to be 2 different ways plants are planted into a garden. That's going to be direct sowing or by transplanting. Crops like lettuce, carrots, peas, and beans are typically going to be direct seeded into the garden. These plants are typically going to mature relatively quickly, so there really isn't a need to start them early indoors. Other plants that we direct seed may not like having their roots disturbed, which is going to make it difficult to transplant them. When we are doing direct seeding, it is important to make sure we have a good seed bed formed. Soil should be tilled and any large clods of soil should be broken up. And this way the seeds are going to have good contact with that soil, so we're going to have better germination that way. When direct seeding, make sure to refer to your seed packet for information on how deep to plant the seeds as well as how far to space the seeds from each other. And plants such as broccoli, peppers, and tomatoes are typically transplanted into the garden as small plants or as transplants. Transplants can be started by an individual or they can be purchased from a nursery, garden center, something like that. Plants grown from transplants tend to have longer development times. Therefore, if we place them in the garden as a small plant, growers are able to get a jump start on growing them. And this is going to allow for a harvest before less than ideal weather conditions arrive, whether that be the heat of the summer for cool season crops or for frost for warm season crops. As a general rule of thumb, transplants are going to be planted at the same depth they were grown in their pots. And again, you're going to want to refer to plant labels to determine how far plants should be spaced from one another. If you can't find information on plant spacing, University of Illinois Extension does have a website, the Illinois Vegetable Garden Guide, that has that information. And the website for that is web.extension.illinois.edu/vegguide. And for more information on producing transplants, we do have a seed starting section of this webinar series, and they have a lot more information on producing your own transplants in that section. Next up, we'll talk some about prepping and fertilizing soils and gardens. And preparing and fertilizing the soil for the upcoming growing season is an important part of any garden. Soil testing is also an important and often overlooked part of gardening. And soil testing is particularly important in urban settings where soil contamination may be a concern. So many soils already contain sufficient amount of nutrients in order to have good plant growth. The best way to determine if garden soils are deficient and they may need to be amended with additional fertilizer is to conduct a soil test. In fact, some locations do not allow the use of certain nutrients unless a soil test has been done and it indicates that those particular nutrients are deficient. The soil test can also tell you what the pH of your soil is, and soil pH is often overlooked, but it is an important part in having a successful garden. Most plants that we're going to grow in a garden setting are going to grow best in soils that have a pH between 6.1 and 6.9. While the soil of the pH can be adjusted, it can take several months to do this. Therefore, the ideal time to conduct your soil test is going to be in the fall. This way, any amendments that have been added will have time to react with the soil before the growing season begins again in the spring. That being said, a soil test can be conducted at any time as long as the soil isn't frozen or it isn't too wet. So when it comes to conducting a soil test, you're going to want to make sure those soils are sufficiently dry. If the soil is too wet to work, it's going to be too wet to take a soil test. Any plant residues or other debris should be cleared from the area that you're going to be testing prior to testing. and you're going to want to dig a small hole, and in the case of flower and vegetable gardens, that hole should be about 6 to 8 inches deep. Once you've dug that hole, you're going to take a slice down the edge of that hole and place that soil into a bucket. You're going to want to take several random samples throughout the garden that you're testing, like the illustration on the right hand side of the slide. You're going to take all those samples, you're going to combine them in that bucket and mix them together well, and then you're going to take a single sample from that combined soil and send that off to a lab for testing. And if soils in a particular garden have noticeable differences in color, drainage, or other characteristics, they should be sampled separately. So in addition to testing for nutrients and pH, soil tests can also be conducted to test for contaminants like heavy metals such as lead. And this can be particularly important in urban locations. And for more information on lead in garden soils, you can go to the website go.illinois.edu/lead-in-the-garden, and there you can find a downloadable fact sheet. And while the University of Illinois does not offer a soil testing service, University of Illinois Extension has compiled a list of labs that do offer this service. To find a lab that performs soil tests, visit extension.illinois.edu/soil test. And when you're selecting a lab, try to choose one that will provide an interpretation with the results. The interpretation will provide you information on how much of a particular nutrient you should add, as well as any steps that should be taken to alter the pH of the soil. And if you need help making sense of your soil test results, contact your local extension office. So when it comes time to start planting our garden, we're going to want to take a little time to prepare that soil before we do that. There's two different ways in which garden soils can be prepared for the growing season, by tilling or by using a no-till approach. Tilling is the way that gardens have been traditionally prepared, and this is often going to be by using a rototiller. So we'll take a rototiller, dig up all the soil in that garden plot, and then plant into it. Tilling is going to allow for the incorporation of oxygen, organic matter, and fertilizers into the soil. And by incorporating organic matter into the soil, this can help loosen up heavy clay soils. In addition to incorporating materials into the soil, tilling can also help break up compacted soils, and this is going to allow for easier penetration of plant roots into the soil. There are some drawbacks to using a till approach to preparing your gardens. If soils are over-tilled or they become pulverized, this is going to lead to small soil particles being formed, and these can dry out quickly and form a crust on the soil, and that's going to make it difficult for water to penetrate and percolate down into the ground. Tilling can also bring up dormant weed seeds from beneath the soil surface, and once these weed seeds are exposed to sunlight, they will germinate, and this can lead to more weed problems. No-till is another approach you can use to preparing your garden soil, and no-till has been used for a number of years in agriculture, and it's quickly growing in popularity in the gardening world. When using a no-till approach, the soil is going to be left undisturbed except for where you're planting plants or your seeds are going to be placed. So by doing this, only a small area of soil is going to be disturbed, and this is going to reduce the amount of compaction to the soil, as well as reduce the amount of weeds being brought to the surface. If you're using a no-till approach, though, it's important that the soil is not walked on. Since the soil isn't being tilled, any foot traffic through that garden is going to compact that soil, and that's not going to be broken up. So this technique is going to be best for raised beds that we're not going to be walking in. And a lot of times we're using a no-till approach, we're going to be using mulches. So by using these mulches and other organic matter, nutrients are going to be added to the soil as these break down. But because these mulches and stuff are being broken down, they are going to be needed to be replaced yearly, if not more frequently. Plant nutrition is going to be essential for us in order to achieve optimum growth and yields. And oftentimes we're going to be getting those nutrients from fertilizers. And fertilizers are products that provide one or more of the chemical elements necessary for plant growth and development. There's going to be two different types of fertilizers available, synthetic and organic. And when it comes to community gardens, a determination is going to need to be made regarding what types of fertilizers are going to be allowed in the gardens. So some community gardens are going to allow both organic and synthetic fertilizers, while other gardens that follow organic principles are only going to allow organic fertilizers. So when it comes to synthetic fertilizers, these fertilizers are going to be manufactured. Many of them are going to be complete, meaning that they contain all three of the major plant nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And some are also going to contain micronutrients such as iron and manganese. Synthetic fertilizers tend to have a higher analysis, and that just means they're going to have a higher concentration of nutrients in them. And these nutrients are also readily available for plant use. Because of the higher analysis in synthetic fertilizers, they tend to be cheaper per pound when we compare them to organic fertilizers. Many of our synthetic fertilizers will release their nutrients relatively rapidly when we compare that to organic fertilizers. There are some synthetic fertilizers that are slow to release though, and these will release their nutrients over a period of several months. Organic fertilizers are derived from plants such as compost and cover crops, or from animals such as blood meal, fish emulsion, and manures. Organic fertilizers tend to have a lower analysis, or they're going to be less nutrient dense than synthetic fertilizers. The nutrients in organic fertilizers often need to be converted into a form that plants can take up. So the fertilizers are going to be slowly broken down by soil microbes, and this is going to release those nutrients into the soil, and the plants can then take them up. While this is a slow process, there are a few advantages to this when it comes to using organic fertilizers. This can be reduced soil crusting, improved water movement, as well as improved soil structure. Another farming technique that's becoming more and more common in the garden is the use of cover crops. Cover crops help prevent erosion, reduce weed populations, and they can help improve the soil by adding organic matter. And there are a wide variety of different cover crops that can be used in the garden setting. Cover crops can be planted before crops are planted, after they are harvested, in the place of a crop, or in a fallow area of the garden. And they are typically going to be divided into warm and cool season cover crops. Warm season cover crops like buckwheat can be planted in the spring or the summer before a crop is planted, or in the place of a crop. They tend to be quick growing, and they're going to do a good job of preventing weeds from establishing, and they can also help reduce soil crusting. Cool season cover crops are going to be planted in late summer to early fall, and this is going to be after a crop has been harvested. They need to be planted early enough though so that they establish before winter sets in. There's going to be two different types of cool season cover crops. Those that are going to be killed by freezing winter temperatures, such as oats, and those that will become dormant and then resume growth again in the spring once it warms up, like winter rye. Those that will resume growth in the spring will need to be killed before a crop can be planted though. And this is usually going to be done 2 to 3 weeks before that crop is planted. And regardless of the type of cover crop, it's important that they are not allowed to go to seed. If that cover crop does go to seed, they're no longer going to be beneficial, but they're going to turn into a weed in your garden. So to ensure that plants don't go to seed, cut them just before they begin to flower. And these plants can be cut by hand. You can use a string trimmer, a brush cutter, or a mower. For a more in-depth look at cover crops, you can check out Dwayne Friend's 4-season gardening presentation entitled Cover Crops, Keep It Growing, Keep It Going. And again, those can be found at go.illinois.edu/4seasonsrecordings. Compost and manures are popular organic fertilizers with gardeners. Despite their benefits, there are some precautions that need to be taken before using them, though. Compost is partially decomposed organic matter, and it's going to be created by biological processes in which soil-inhabiting organisms break down plant tissue. When that decomposition process is complete, the compost will turn into a dark brown powdery material, and it's going to have an earthy aroma. The compost process is similar to the breakdown of organic matter in the soil. However, composting is going to occur much more quickly because we can manipulate the environment and make that ideal for soil microbes. It's important to make sure that any compost that is added to the garden has been sufficiently decomposed though. If raw waste or unfinished compost is placed in the garden, The decomposition process will rob the soil of nitrogen, and that won't be available for your plants. A sufficiently decomposed compost will be uniform in appearance, so you shouldn't be able to identify any of the raw materials that were used to create that compost. Compost can be used as both a mulch on top of the soil and mixed into the soil as a soil amendment. And if you want more information on composting, the process of doing it, how to create compost bins, you can visit University of Illinois Extension's Composting for the Homeowner website at web.extension.illinois.edu/homecompost. Animal manure is another amendment that is commonly used in gardens. Like compost, manures can be a good source of organic matter as well as nutrients in gardens. But before you use any sort of manure, it's important to make sure that it's been sufficiently aged. Animal manure can contain bacteria such as Listeria, Salmonella, and E. coli. So to avoid contaminating food with these and other manure-based pathogens, you want to ensure that the manure is sufficiently aged. If you decide to allow fresh manure in your gardens, that manure is going to need to be applied a minimum of 120 days before the crop will be harvested. And this is going to reduce the risk of pathogens being present on harvested crops. Oftentimes it's best to apply raw manure after the final harvest in the fall. In addition to potential pathogens, raw manure can also introduce weed seeds into the garden. It's important to make sure you check and see if there are any local regulations regarding the use of raw manure. A better option may be to purchase composted manure. Commercially processed manure products are often available at garden centers and box stores. They should be sufficiently aged and should indicate that they are pathogen-free. Aged manure should not smell like manure, but similar to compost with an earthy aroma. Individuals who raise livestock and horses may also have composted manure available. For a list of individuals that have manure available, visit University of Illinois Extension's Manure Share website at web.extension.illinois.edu/manureshare. And regardless of your source of manure, never use cat, dog, or pig manures. Parasites that may be present in these types of manures are more likely to survive and infect people than those of other types of manures such as horse or cow. More information on garden plants and how to care for them can be found on our University of Illinois Extension Horticulture website. And here you'll find a bunch of different websites with information on growing herbs, vegetables, fruits, and all kinds of other different plants. And this wraps up the planning and prepping section. Make sure to check out the rest of our community garden videos, and thanks for watching.